shows that the king has absolutely no clue of what's going on. It's actually sad to read these statements and the way he presents things. He's obviously manipulated and doesn't know what's going on. So the real power is with the prime minister. He's a very interesting person. He's extremely smart and so on. But I think he uses sectarianism to maintain the power of the family. And I think it's probably good politics. One thing that we don't talk about too much, even though, thank God, for once I heard the word Saudis when talking about Bahrain. Usually you don't hear that when you hear about talks on Bahrain. But the Saudis are really in control. They want to use Bahrain as a wall against Iran, basically. They do not wish to have a real constitutional monarchy because that could be a bad example for them. But they have the power. I mean, they control the oil flows of Bahrain, period. I mean, most of the oil of Bahrain comes from an oil field which lies in Saudi territorial waters, which is pumped by the Saudis, managed by the Saudis, and shipped by the Saudis. So, if they don't like something, well, they cut production by 50,000 barrels, as they did for the FTA agreement. And, they know what's going on. And today, one of the reasons the royal family is not so forced to negotiate as they were in 2000 is because they depend on their income from the wealth of the island. If the island is going down the drain economically, as we're speaking now, they're suffering. But today the Saudis are making up for that. And so the royal family is not so able or willing to compromise. Finally, as I mentioned, I think the Bassiouni report, and that's a big beef of the opposition, I think, will not be implemented. It will just the cosmetic part will be implemented, which was exactly a redux of 2001. The document which was published by the king in 2001, brought tears to people's eyes because it was so open and we're going to change society and everything, and we're going to have a political system where torture will not be. Most of the stuff which the Bassiouni report requests were accepted in 2001 in the National Charter, which was voted by the population as a whole, except nothing happened. And ultimately, it was really, at least it is viewed by the opposition as having been just a tool to appease the Americans, and in essence. Now, let me go back the other way, though. There is a mainline Sunni view today, and we tend to underestimate this a lot nowadays here. And the fact is that there is a small Sunni opposition, but it is minor. There is one, and it's called under the political organization called Al-Wad, and the head of Al-Wad is now in jail for another 5 years or so, and which is after having been allegedly tortured, and that's really a shame. He should be released. But the fact is, the Sunnis are not so worried about this liberal Sunni element because they're really very small. But there is a genuine fear, and we should not underestimate it, I think. There's a genuine fear among many Sunnis in Bahrain, especially the ones that are more closer to the brothers and to the Salafis who count, that, the Shia are really working for the Iranians. And it's very hard to argue against it, because that's an article of faith, that the leadership, and I think, frankly, the opposition is its own worst enemies in many ways. Why is the leaders of Al-Wafaq, why are they clerics? Is that political or what? I mean, I'm sorry, but that just hurts the credibility of the whole system. The leadership of Al-Haq, the leader of Al-Haq is allowed to come back to Bahrain after the March problems. And he comes, before the March problems, he's allowed to come back to Bahrain. What does he do? He goes to Beirut first. And you know what? This is interpreted by the government as he's going to Beirut to get his orders from Hezbollah. And it may be true. And that is really stupid. And anyway, so there is a point from the Sunni side. Yeah. The Sunnis now, many Sunnis, and you see that in the bulletin boards and so on, they will argue very strongly that they are the majority. And They may not be the majority, but the fact is they feel they're the majority, and therefore that's important. It's something we should not forget. Right? They also argue that the Shia, and that goes back to the March 13th evening when al-Wefaq said, was negotiating with the crown prince and left the room to sort of clear things with al-Haq, and nothing happened. But basically, the crown prince and his people and most of the more even liberal Sunnis in the island are saying that the Shia groups are al-Wefaq and so on are really refusing to negotiate until all their demands are met up front. There is also some truth to that. So we cannot just blame everybody on both sides, and we have to remember that we have to resolve this connection here. So the funny thing now is that many Sunnis are arguing against the Al-Khalifas. There's been a wonderful article published this week by a gentleman, I forgot his name, Jedlin or something like that, which argues that, in fact, the Al-Khalifas are taking big risks because they could be overthrown by the Sunnis for being too nice to the Shia. Now, I think that's part of this new approach, I think, which the government is taking, where the Al-Khalifa is saying, we can't negotiate because, we are stuck here. We're the balancing factor. So what's the reconciliation here? In the past, the Sunni-Shia distinction was not important, especially not among the elites anyway. Many intermarriages took place and whatnot. In the 50s and the 70s, the Sunnis and the Shia, especially the elites, were very much united under the banners of Arab nationalism, Nasserism, anti-colonialism against the Brits, whatever, The sectarian feelings now are exacerbated by the involvement of the neighboring powers, by Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, which stokes the fear of all the communities. So the key here is to let Bahrain be alone. How do you do that? It's easier said than done, right? Because the groups actually need the support of the foreign powers to keep themselves in control. The prime minister needs the Saudis, the brothers need the Saudis, the Salafis need the Saudis, the members of Al-Haq may be needing the Iranians. Of course, they don't tell you that, but maybe it's the case. We don't know. But Iran and Saudi Arabia will fight in Bahrain to the last Bahraini, no doubt. And that has to stop. But it's not easy to stop because those are big guys. So the problem is these groups, these countries, and the more extreme groups in Bahrain have used this concept of sectarianism. And it's easy to push that. Everybody feels they have to go back to their own community. But to stop it and make it go back is extremely difficult. It only took 350 years for the wars of religion to get better. And I'm not sure they're all finished. The foreign powers play a negative role. So we have to make sure that the Saudis, how do we convince that the Saudis, that the Bahraini Shia are not just stooges of Iran, that they view themselves as Bahraini first, and vice versa for Iran? This is really the first step, right? We have to include Iraq in this because Iraq and the Murja in Iraq are very, very powerful in Bahrain. And they should be involved because otherwise the Iraqis will play the Iranians against the Saudis as they are doing now and, we'll use Bahrain as a fighting ground. So we have to convince all these three countries that it is not in their interest to interfere in Bahrain. And then once we have that, we can try to get the 3 points I mentioned earlier. And we can try to get the elites back together under the leadership of the Crown Prince, who has lost a lot of his power within his family, in my view anyway. And as I have mentioned to some gentlemen from the embassy the other day, I think we have to make a very big effort, or they have to make a big effort to remove the prime minister. Everybody says it's not easy. It's very difficult. Well, perhaps, but the king theoretically has absolute power in Bahrain. So it can happen, but I agree. It's easier said than done. And but I still agree that the Al-Khalifas are needed because there is a need for that balancing factor, that balancing element. And it could be just in between. But they have to handle this very carefully. I think the Crown Prince would be probably a good person for this.